Okay, we are getting somewhere. And it's about time. And it looks like, I think we're going. So, okay. All right, so welcome everyone. We are going to have a fabulous discussion today, led by Beth Harper, who is the editor of the CUNY website Sun, a former editor and reporter of the Associated Press and author of 3 books. She, one of her first jobs out of college was working for an NGO focused on nuclear disarmament in the Reagan area. She's going to lead our discussion. Just to let you know, feel free to come on with your videos. We'd love to see you, but please be muted. If there's any technical problem, in the past we have had some Zoom bombing, we're going to turn off the event and we ask you to use the same login information you came in with to come back to the meeting. Hopefully it won't come to that. Thank you so much and enjoy the event, and over to you, Beth.
Welcome everybody to our latest Hunter College High School Alumni Association program. I'm Beth Harpaz, class of 77. I'm hosting today's talk called Gone But Not Forgotten, the Beginning of the End of Nuclear Weapons. I'll be speaking with a leader in the international anti-nuclear movement, Susi Snyder, class of 95. Welcome, Susi, give a wave. It's great to see you. You're joining us from the Netherlands where it's already mid-evening. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here. I love Hunter people, so this is awesome.
I'm wearing my proud to be a Hunter High alum purple button. So Susi is the president of an organization that won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. She also runs a project called Don't Bank on the Bomb, and she's involved in another broader movement called Humanitarian Disarmament. We'll be talking to Susi about where things stand in the world right now in terms of the nuclear threat, including a very exciting and positive development that happened just 2 days ago. Susi has really devoted her life to peace and justice causes, and we'll find out how she got involved in the anti-nuclear world and other kinds of activism. We'll talk about the history of the No Nukes movement. Probably some of you were on the great No Nukes march of the early 1980s. And we'll get Susi's thoughts on where the Biden administration is going to go in terms of nuclear arms. And we'll have questions and comments at the end. Before we get started though, with interviewing Susi, we're going to kick things off with a song. It's Hunter, and you know, we all come together around music and singing. I'm honored to introduce Pat GORDON Lamanna, Hunter class of 65. She's an award-winning singer-songwriter who's done 2 concerts for our Alumni Association, including a beautiful concert of peace songs last August 6th on Hiroshima Day. I was in the audience for that. It was really moving. Pat's going to open our program now with a much-loved Song of Peace by Ed McCurdy called Last Night I Had the Strangest Dream. It was first recorded in 1950. Take it away, Pat.
Thank you very much, Beth. And I just want to say hi to my classmates. I have a couple of classmates here and a couple of friends from other parts of my life as well. So thanks for coming. If you know it, stay muted, but sing along. Last night I had the strangest dream I'd ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room all filled with women and men. And the paper they were signing said they'd never fight again. And when the paper was all signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they all joined hands and bowed their heads, and grateful prayers were prayed. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and swords and guns and uniforms were scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream I'd ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war.
Beautiful. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. Pat lives in Poughkeepsie, and I swear when the pandemic is over, I'm putting my guitar in my car and driving up to play and sing with you, Pat. And I saw a classmate, Debbie Dorwit, on the video group earlier, where she's upstate too. So maybe we'll all get to play and sing one day when this nightmare is over.
That would be delightful. Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. Now for the main event, Gone But Not Forgotten, the beginning of the end of nuclear weapons. As I said earlier, for those joining just now, I'm Beth Harpaz. I'm a journalist, Hunter class of 77. I'm here with Susi Snyder, class of 95. She's the president of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. She also runs a project called Don't Bank on the Bomb. I want to start our talk with some good news that's just happened 2 days ago, January 22nd, with everything else going on, the inauguration and the pandemic. I don't know if people caught it, but here's the headline. Nuclear weapons have officially been prohibited by international law. Yay! And yet we still have nuclear weapons. So Susi, let's start there. What does that mean? And from there, we'll get into your background, the history of the movement, and other things.
Well, great. Thanks so much. And really such a wonderful pleasure to be here. I love talking about nuclear weapons. I have for a while. It's kind of a strange passion, but there it is. So here's the thing. If something is prohibited under international law, that doesn't mean it just disappears. I wish that were the case, but that's just not what happens. You know, child labor is prohibited under international law. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means that the world looks at it differently. And as of 2 days ago, the world now looks at nuclear weapons differently. See, back in, I'd say we started about 2013, we started talking about nuclear bombs in a new way. And instead of talking about them as the ultimate guarantor of security, we started to talk about what they do to people, what they do to the environment. And all of a sudden, all of these countries who were kind of like, yeah, whatever, started to sit up and look a little different and saying, wait, this has something to do with me. It's not just those 9 countries that have them. If they use them, there's a major impact on me. My country is going to suffer. The environment that we all rely on is going to suffer. And so the conversation changed. And that change in how we talk about nuclear weapons, and when we started talking about the consequences, when the International Red Cross said, if they get used, we are not sending our people in because it's too dangerous. We will not. There is no help. That's when countries came together and decided, well, if they're this bad, if there's no help when they get used, we better do everything we can to make sure that never happens. We need to put more pressure on the countries that have them. And the only thing that ever gets rid of something awful, like you don't just up and decide, oh, I'm going to get rid of, bad stuff. No, you need legal pressure. And so in this case, countries came together, about 130 countries came together in 2017 and negotiated a new treaty. And it's the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And what's super exciting to talk about this today, like today on the 24th of January, is that 75 years ago, the UN met for the very first time. Like, the world was in tatters, Second World War had just ended, countries are going, oh my gosh, we have to abolish the scourge of war. Scourge, whatever. We have to abolish the scourge of war and never let anything horrible like this happen again. Nuclear weapons had been used in Japan and people were just, whoa, no. We can't let this go. This is not okay. And in 1946, the very first meeting, the very first resolution of the UN, countries there said, we need to outlaw and eliminate these weapons. And it took 75 years, but now they're outlawed. And that outlaw gives us a pathway to eliminate them and to do it safely and securely where everybody's involved when they choose to be.
All right, that's a great place to kind of jump off into the rest of our talk. You know, a little bit of good news for a change, right? So let's back up a little though, from today's headlines to your background. Tell us how you got interested in this issue. You know, a lot of Hunter alumni have been activists on all kinds of peace and justice issues through the decades. I read that early on you met with some Native Americans who had been forced off their land, their homeland in Nevada for nuclear testing, and that had a real impact on you. Tell us about that, and was that right out of college that you happened to be out there? Give us a little background there.
Yeah, so I'm Susie, and I have a very strange story. but you know, I'm a Hunter girl, so of course I do. I have a life filled with twists and turns, and I think everybody who's participating in this call could say the same. My twisty and turny life led me after college. It led me to Wall Street for a little bit, and there I went to work every day. And I didn't see anybody smile for a really long time, like a really long time. And it sucked. And you know, the money was good, but I'm sorry, I like when people smile. So I had a hard time. So I split. And I decided to figure out something else. Some twists and turns led me to Las Vegas of all places. You know, Sin City. It was kind of exciting, Las Vegas. I didn't get there the way many people get there, which is to go and gamble and have a little party. I got there because somebody had tipped me off that the US was going to do nuclear weapon testing. And I said, well, that's completely bonkers. The US, that's insane. Those bombs are dumb. They're not going to test them anymore. Isn't there a treaty? This can't happen. And I met some people. I met some people who were working to resist that testing, resist US nuclear policy. And they were led by an indigenous spiritual leader of the Western Shoshone Nation. His name was Corbin Harney. And this group of people, it was called the Shandahai Network. And Shandahai is a word in the traditional language of the Western Shoshone people. It means peace and harmony with all creation. And this group of people, you know, and here I am, I show up, I'm just like, hey, hi, I'm Susie. I heard this crazy thing's gonna happen. They're like, hi, Susie. Yes, it is gonna happen. You wanna help us? I said, well, okay. And they invited me in, and Corbin was like, so here's the story. And he sat me down, and over the next 5 years, actually, I met with many indigenous people in the area, people whose history, whose culture had been completely uprooted in 1951 when the US decided to form an on-continent nuclear testing ground. And so for those who don't know, because most people don't know, the US blew up like 1,000 nuclear bombs about an hour outside of Las Vegas. And unfortunately, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas when it comes to the radioactive fallout from that. And this is something that really made a difference to me. I thought it's just nuts. I still think it's completely nuts. Why would you blow up the worst weapon ever created in your own country? And and the reason it was done is because, you know, they had to show their weapons were bigger than the Russian weapons, and the Russians would blow one up on indigenous people in Russia, or what is now Kazakhstan, and show, oh no, our weapons are bigger than your weapons. And this process of blowing up bombs to demonstrate strength harmed a lot of people. And it got me, well, it still overwhelms me sometimes. I've met people who have had their lives forever changed and forever scarred by these activities. Women who became school children because they wanted to have lots of kids and have a big family, but they kept trying, and 17 miscarriages later decided, no, I can't try anymore. I met people who wanted to, you know, continue living off the land as they had and as their people had for thousands of generations, but they couldn't because nothing would grow anymore, because the water was contaminated, because everybody got sick. And that changed me. And, you know, I'm a hunter girl, right? I put my creative power, my thought, my energy into trying to solve this problem. And it's now a couple of decades later. And those memories, those experiences, what the weapon does to people, what the testing did to people, people who have been ignored, people who have been silenced. There's hope now. There's something else. I recently had a conversation with some folks near the Trinity site in New Mexico, where the bomb was born. The test where Oppenheimer said, I've become death, the destroyer of worlds. And they, this first nuclear experiment in July of 1945, and from the Tuscaloosa Basin, and it's right downwind. Nobody told them that they were going to blow up a nuclear bomb there. Their cows died, ranchers, you know, their income dried up. And we were talking recently, and we we're talking about this treaty, and they said, we're so excited about this new treaty because we're in that treaty, because the treaty recognizes the disproportionate impact of the nuclear weapon programs, particularly on Indigenous communities. And not only that, it also obliges all the countries that join it to work together to help those communities. Like, it has these positive obligations. So these places that have been affected by all the parts of nuclear weapons, that's both the mining of uranium, the producing of the key components of the bombs themselves, the testing, the use, all these people who have been affected, and that is kind of all of us. We now have a space to kind of go and to say to, hey, these countries, there's now 52 countries who are fully on board and have made it their own national law. There's 86 countries who have said, yeah, we're in the process of doing it. And the next couple of years, those numbers will just grow and grow and grow and grow. And those countries commit to helping people who have been hurt by nuclear weapons. And so for me, who started off being like, hey, I'm Susie, I'm dumb, I don't know anything about this issue, but you know, you seem like nice people and it seems like the worst thing ever. You know, now go back and say, okay, the worst thing ever, we have tools to stop it. We have tools to help. And that's, I'm pretty excited about that. And it's been a bit of a journey, but I'll say it's been really, really interesting. And every time I think about, oh, why am I doing this? I think about those people who were forced off their land so the US could blow up bombs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're so eloquent and you just bring it home in such a visceral way. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who had chills and tears as you were speaking. So I think, you know, when we can bring it down to the impact on human by human, it becomes really tangible in a way that otherwise it wouldn't be. I wondered if you would just quickly hopscotch. I mean, I want to get to today's politics and all that, but could you just like read your resume? I mean, just because you were involved in so many interesting peace and justice organizations, and, you know, like I said, I'm sure that many of the people who are listening, you know, are interested in that world and know folks in that world if they haven't worked in it themselves. So, you know, how'd you get to where you are now, how you ended up in the Netherlands? And also, I know Iniko and I were working on a little poll because we wanted to try to see like where our audience was at in terms of different milestones in anti-nuclear activism over the decades. So Iniko's going to do some magic like Zoom poll thing, guys. So those of you who are out there, look for that. And you know, it's just a couple of quick yes or no questions that you can answer and listen at the same time, just like we can, you know, rub our tummies and, you know, chew gum at the same time. So take it away, Susie. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so Vegas is really where I got my feet wet in the whole campaigning and grassroots organizing. And what does it like being completely and utterly nervous when I went to meet the mayor of Las Vegas. And I got the mayor of Las Vegas to promise, not just to me, but then he did a press conference to promise to personally arrest the driver of any truck carrying nuclear materials going through his city. You know, that was kind of neat. It was totally nerve-wracking, but awesome. And I got my feet wet doing that. And that was really community organizing. It was going into schools. It was going into senior centers It was going into community centers. It was asking the local coffee house, hey, can we do movie night? Can you show Dr. Strangelove? You know, can we get into that and do a little talk? It was, you know, working with folks who are doing other types of organizing, whether they were veterans and organizing for better Veterans Administration benefits, whether they were Catholic workers and organizing to feed the poor. Or to help shelter the homeless. It was connecting movements at a really, really local level. And so took that, went there, you know, was doing that for a while, and we expanded our work from Las Vegas. We went quite broadly across the region and started working with a lot of other Indigenous communities across the region, because the US Southwest is, you know, there's still a lot of active Indigenous communities. And connecting more. And as it got bigger and bigger, started to think, okay, well, what I'm doing here is great, and they're great people, but maybe there's another step. So I heard about a job opening up in New York, and it was, you know, I heard through some friends, oh, you know, it's this job at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds kind of cool. And I had used some of their materials before in my local organizing. So I applied for the job, and kind of to my surprise, got it. And I became the director of WILP's United Nations office. And that all of a sudden it changed. And it was still those same principles of community organizing. You go to where people are. You talk about what is it that makes them passionate about why they're doing what they're doing. An ambassador doesn't get to be an ambassador because, you know, it's not just because you've made some big donation. Like, you got to want it. You got to work to get there. So what drives them? What makes them feel like this international forum is a mechanism for change? And those same ideas. Oh, make sure people know what's happening, know and hear from those who are affected. And I spent 5-6 years in New York with WILP in the UN office. We had a brilliant program that worked. We got the UN Security Council to recognize that women are impacted differently in war, that women have a voice and have a place in rebuilding a society after war. That if you do peace building and you forget to include women at the start, it's never going to last. We did that. We kept the disarmament work going, and we really kind of looked at what can we do on the international level. We brought together folks from around the world. As a women's peace organization, a feminist peace organization, it was really a reinforcement of, and a coming home from my own values of equality and justice. And then there's a job opening in Geneva, like the top job of WILP. So I got to be a secretary general for a while. I still love saying that, like, I was a secretary general. And I did that for about 5 years, and it was quite amazing. And WILP gave me the space to go from a community organizer in Vegas to being a UN, you know, to doing the high politics of the UN in New York, to then being in Geneva. And in Geneva, we helped organize WILP women around the world, mostly voluntary folks doing local community initiatives, peace building initiatives, post-conflict initiatives, to end war forever, to build off of core feminist values, equality, justice, accountability, transparency. And we had programs in 37 countries, and it was amazing to do that work. Yeah. And after a while, I got kind of tired. I wanted to focus on one thing for a little bit. And I got called from some nice folks in the Netherlands who said, hey, we just raised a bunch of money for a nukes program. Do you want to come here and run it? I was like, The Netherlands is nice, no mountains, but okay. And, you know, lo and behold, I came to the Netherlands, and I'm really lucky that I did. I met my partner here. I have a lovely kid. I learned the language, sort of. I just gave a speech in Dutch the other day. I sound like a 3-year-old with a German accent, but people are very kind and forgiving. And I've been here working on this project. And before I left Geneva, WILF was one of the founders and one of the early organizations in the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And we said, okay, this needs to happen, and we need to help foster and let this grow. And then WILF kind of carried it and hosted the staff, the international staff for a bit. And then, yeah, then it birthed into its own registered organization, registered charity. And I became the president, and I guess a few years ago, which is nice. It just means I get to do a lot of work and talk a lot to the executive director, who's amazing, one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. And yeah, a lot of hard work, a lot of good luck, and fortunately, amazing people all throughout, because people genuinely want the world to be better. And I think that's an important thing that I see, whether it was local in Las Vegas or in the UN Security Council. People have different ways to get there, but they want the world to be better.
Yeah, and that's an important takeaway for all of us at this juncture in the United States, where we are finally feeling hope for the first time, and yet wondering the way forward, right? It's quite a resume, Susi. Now, in terms of our audience, we're just looking at our poll here. So I guess we don't have anybody old enough today who remembers firsthand the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. About half of us participated in duck and cover drills in the 50s and 60s. About a third of us are old enough to remember firsthand the 62 Cuban Missile Crisis. Not so many folks were at the 1982 rally in New York City. I definitely was there, and I remember some friends from Hunter with me. There was a great concert in Central Park. I'm actually wearing a little button, I don't know if you can see it, also from the 80s. It says Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Bay Ridge, because in the late 80s there was a Navy destroyer that they parked in the water at Bay Ridge that people said there was a nuclear weapon on it. The government would never confirm it, but there were a lot of good protests there at that time. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who grew up in an apartment building in New York City that had one of those old fallout shelter signs on the first floor, those old orange, yellow, and black strange signs. And then you'd go in the basement and there'd be these moldering shelves of cans of food that we were somehow supposed to live on should there be a nuclear attack. I actually worked for a few years, as Aniko said, at an NGO at the UN that was organizing countries outside the superpowers in the 80s to pressure them to disarm. That was during the Reagan era, as the arms race was heating up, and that, I think, is what really led to the anti-nuclear movement in the US growing and culminating in that march. 1 million people took part in that march. It remains to this day the largest political demonstration in US history, although it's kind of faded, I think, I think there's a reduced consciousness since the end of the Cold War among Americans about the nuclear threat. Even when North Korea is rattling its sabers, everybody kind of worries for a day about Japan and South Korea, but I don't get the sense that people are mobilizing in a grassroots general way here. Was there even one question in the presidential debates about nuclear weapons? So Susi, I guess my question for you is, what is the state of the anti-nuclear movement these days? How would you describe the no nukes movement out there in general? How do you get people's attention for this issue, given competing concerns about climate change and the pandemic and inequality and democracy for that matter?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not easy, not even a little bit. There are so many competing interests, and we're bombarded with so much information. It's a great question. How do you sift through? We found, again, we try very hard to go to where people are. So what is it that people are concerned about? And I'll tell you one other thing, within the campaign, within ICANN, we really like to celebrate. So we celebrate every single win, every chance that we get. So on Friday, while it may not have made any of the big news channels, there were hundreds of actions and demonstrations going on to celebrate the fact that nuclear weapons are prohibited under international law. And a lot of people may not have known what was happening with some of those celebrations, and thinking about New York in particular. Maybe some of you saw One World Trade Center was lit up in blue and white on Friday. That was because of the entry into force of this treaty. And that was kind of cool. The borough of Manhattan was declared or issued a proclamation on Friday, declaring it a day to end where the Manhattan Project started nuclear weapons. Maybe Manhattan could help end nuclear weapons.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. And so we're out there, and we're not in the same numbers in the streets. We're in big numbers on social media. The ICANN in particular is a campaign that is, I'm kind of one of the old people in the campaign, which I sort of love. Because I've been doing this for a couple of decades, and it's awesome to see the leadership coming from people who are in their 20s, who are in their 30s, who are saying, hey, you know what? This is an issue that matters to everybody. This is an issue of gross injustice. Like, you look at the countries that have nuclear weapons, and the reason they didn't fight each other was because they outsourced their wars for decades to countries that are now still struggling to get out of those situations, get out of the infrastructure damage caused by the wars that were taking place there. So people are aware of these issues, but they may not make the connection to nuclear weapons. People are aware of racism and colonialism, and nuclear weapons embody that. But again, it's a connection that we're still trying to build and to link in people's minds. And it's hard, and we try lots of different things. And again, going to where people are, you know, we were out in the streets with people during the Black Lives Matters protest this summer, all over, you know, and we share in campaigns to address issues of gross military spending, to change priorities, to shift budget priorities. You know, it would be great to see the Veterans Administration get the money it needs to provide veterans with the care they need coming back from conflict, as opposed to investing, you know, just untold millions in bombs that we're never going to use. Like, it just, you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And we do a lot of stuff also at the municipal level, because again, go to where people are. So we have people locally organizing in cities. So, and I'll start in New York and I'll go across the country quickly. In New York, the majority of the New York City Council supports a package of legislation. It hasn't come up for vote yet because the city's been busy, but supports a package of legislation that would not only recognize all the different parts of New York City that were impacted by the Manhattan Project, because there's a couple of places that are still contaminated.
Wow.
Not only recognize that, but also make sure that the pension funds of New York, like New York City's 5 pension funds, that's education, city workers, sanitation, teachers, I forgot one. Oh, police, police and firefighters, yeah. All of those do not invest in companies that produce nuclear bombs. It's a package of legislation. And it's just, there's majority support, just needs to come up for a vote. And that's because people locally, people in New York organized. People in DC did the same. People in San Francisco did the same. People in LA did the same. Small group of committed people making change, right? As Margaret Mead said, we take our inspiration from the writers of our past, and we keep going at it. That's something that has been inspiring and picking people up. And we're connecting also, of course, with the movement to protect the climate and to save our climate and to save our planet. These are existential threats. If we don't work together, kind of all in hot water. And sorry for the bad pun, but
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to break for questions soon. And if you want to ask Susi something, or if you have a comment, raise your hand and Nico will somehow connect with you. You can also put things in the chat and I'll try to be on top of that when I get to it, which will be in a minute or two. Okay, so the big question I want you to educate us on now, Susie, where do things stand in the world right now with nuclear weapons? Some of us may be familiar with the famous doomsday clock, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists puts out. It's at 100 minutes to midnight at the moment. They're going to update it on the 27th of January. I'm going to be really interested to see whether they pull it back or forward. Maybe Biden coming into office will, put the clock back a little bit, give us a little more time. It feels right now like the only headlines ever come from North Korea, and occasionally there's a dust up with Israel and Iran. But it's still the US and Russia who are the big players in terms of who has the bombs, right? Or I don't really know much about this. So please correct me if I'm wrong. Give us an overview of the nuclear weapons landscape today, and especially America's role. Who are the players? Where do things stand?
Well, I think the planet let out a collective sigh of relief last Wednesday. And I just want to put that out there. I don't know how many people I've been in touch with all over the world who said, "Oh, Susie, are you okay? How are you managing? Are you all right?" And I said, "Oh, I feel like I unclenched my jaw for the first time in 5 years."
Like, what is that funny feeling in my soul? And then I recognized that it was hope. Like Emily Dickinson, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in my soul. Like for the first time, I felt hope.
And so that's reverberating everywhere. But there's still 13,000 nuclear weapons on the planet. The US and Russia have most of them. There's a few thousand that are pointed at each other and can go off, and they basically give themselves 6 minutes to make the decision. So it's the president who says, it's now Biden and Putin who say, yes or no, we will launch, we will not launch. And they make that decision in 6 minutes. And 30 minutes from that, bombs can be hitting each other's territory. These things are fast. They're huge rockets they're fast. So there's 13,000 of them. We were almost at a spot where there was no agreement between the US and Russia about each other's weapons at all. But good news, more good news on Friday. The US said, hey, you know what? Russia asked us to extend this treaty, this strategic arms reduction treaty. We're going to do it. No cost extension for anybody who does fundraising. No cost extension. Right?
That one actually did penetrate my news feed. That was the one thing I did see. It was funny because I kept looking, for the other thing from January 22nd or whenever it was, and I didn't see that pop up, but I did see the treaty extension. So I was glad that it was like, okay, we finally have enough room now in the cycle of chaos to actually talk about something other than Donald Trump.
But this is huge. Like this treaty, if this had expired, that means there was no more check and balance. That means, I don't know if you'll remember, in the movies a lot, there's the red line, the phone line, like where you call before you launch the missile. You call, hey, just to check, is this real? Are you actually trying to kill me now? And, nothing would have been in place. So that's really huge. And it makes us all safer, because it means that inspection teams in both countries look at each other's weapons. It means the numbers of weapons that they're actually allowed to deploy, instead of being uncapped, it's capped. And that's good. That brings the numbers down. That's good. That gives us some stability. That gives us something to work with. It's not getting rid of them completely, but it gives us something to work with.
Right. It's like you said earlier, it's a path forward from here to where we'd like to be. So I do see there are a couple of questions and comments in the chat. Let's see. Charlene Leahy, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I hope I am. Oh, good. Okay, she says, I worked with the Peace Wave movement who appealed to the UN for abolition in 1988. Is ICANN currently organizing with groups from Japan, including survivors?
Well, ICANN, the whole thing with ICANN is that we start our work with the human experience. And those who lived through the bombing of Hiroshima, the bombing of Nagasaki. Because the thing is, despite the rumors, not everybody dies. And for those who live, it's horrifying. When we accepted our Nobel Peace Prize, one of the survivors from Hiroshima spoke, Setsuko Thurlow. And she said when the treaty concluded negotiations, she said, nuclear weapons have always been immoral, and now they are illegal. And Setsuko is just one of many survivors that we work with. We work with groups all across Japan. I'll tell you, on Friday, to celebrate the entry into force of this treaty, which the Japanese government has not signed, there's some issues there. There's some politics.
That's so surprising.
Yeah. But the mayor of Nagasaki had put up a huge countdown clock. Like the Times Square ball drops, on New Year's. They put one up in Nagasaki. So at the moment that the treaty entered into force in Nagasaki, the mayor hit the button and it was like fireworks going off, and there was a celebration. Nagasaki, Hiroshima, the whole the prefecture, it's like the state in which the city of Hiroshima is in. The governor is extremely active on this issue. They do public education, but there's some quite hawkish folks in the Japanese parliament. The prime minister, the former prime minister in particular, really wanted Japan to be a military power again, which it hasn't been allowed to be since 1945. And so there's some issues there. It's politics everywhere. But we're really lucky. We work with and center the story of those who have lived experience, because that matters. And that is, you can read all you want. You can have multiple physics degrees, but when you have lived through the experience of crawling out of a crumbled school, being 13 years old and just hearing people cry for water. When you've lived through that, when you tour the world for the rest of your life with a banner of every schoolgirl's name that was lost that day, and you're the only survivor, it changes things and it changes the conversation. And that is the center of ICANN's work. And I think that's why we've been successful, is because we talk about the people. I'll see if I can put in the chat or share with folks through Iniko afterwards. We did an amazing exhibition over the summer that really looked at these stories of survivors and their importance in this issue as a whole.
Actually, just reminded me, I meant to say earlier, those of us who are on Twitter, we should follow you and ICANN, and to try to keep up with the latest every day. Sarah Schoenwetter, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. You have a wonderful little anecdote that you've put in the chat. Do you want to unmute yourself and just share that with us? Are you still?
Actually, I think Pat was also in the group. We I don't know, somehow we hooked up with a group from SANE. I can't even remember what the initials stood for.
Yeah, it wasn't initials. It was the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, which is now Peace Action.
Okay. Thanks for the reminder. And I remember the Atomic Energy Commission had a storefront, and I don't remember whether it was on Madison or Lexington in the 50s, where they tried to promote the notion that sheltering in basements would save people from nuclear explosions. And we walked around with signs that said, in shelters, all men are created, before the women's movement, are cremated equal.
That's a great one. All men are cremated equal. Love it.
We picketed the United Nations. And in those days, Hunter was all girls and Stuyvesant was all boys. And there were some boys from Stuyvesant who joined us, who wound up in my class at Brandeis University the next year. It was kind of cool.
That's wild. I see a question from Chris Lombardi, who recently published a terrific book about resistance among folks in the military. And Chris says, could you highlight the work of the Plowshares movement and Dan Ellsberg's work on command and control?
Yes. First off, was so grateful for the Plowshares movement, for the Ellsbergs, for the Berrigans, for all of these people who, like, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for grassroots movements for decades and generations. We really wouldn't be. So I really need to emphasize that. The Plowshares movement in particular, if you know the biblical phrase, "We shall beat their swords into plowshares," it takes its energy from that. And it's people who risk everything, who risk their freedom, who risk their lives, to go and to physically, in some situations, to physically draw attention to the location of nuclear weapons facilities. For fans of Orange is the New Black, I don't know if any of you are, there's a character in that based on one of the recently freed incarcerated people from within the Plowshares movement, who's an elderly nun who entered a facility in Tennessee. And you don't think a nun in her late 70s, early 80s should be able to enter a highly secured facility hosting the component parts for nuclear weapons, but she was. The guard who was supposed to shoot her on sight didn't, and lost his job because he didn't shoot her or her. It was two nuns and a lay person who had gone in together, and they were there to bring attention to this issue. The Plowshares movement continues. With recently, there are some folks in Kings Bay, Georgia, who are trying to draw attention to the docking of U.S. submarines armed with nuclear weapons. And they were arrested and are now serving quite lengthy prison sentences for just trying to, again, they break into facilities, which is a misdemeanor crime, and indeed, and take that risk to draw attention to the greater crime, the greater risk. And I'm honored to know some of folks who have been involved in Plowshares, and so grateful for their work, because the world wouldn't be the same if it weren't for people drawing attention to these issues. Similarly, the Ellsberg, look at Ellsberg, you look at Command and Control, which is a book that came out a couple of years ago. Command and Control illustrated the near misses that we've had with nuclear weapons over the decades. Yeah, Dorothy Day's granddaughter. Thank you, Charlene, for bringing that up.
Has just put in the chat that Dorothy Day, the great Catholic activist, that her granddaughter has just started a 2-year prison sentence for civil disobedience at the Kings Bay, Georgia Trident submarine base. And Chris has said that the former nun that Susie described before was the widow of Philip Berrigan, very interesting, who was famous fighting the war in Vietnam and founded Plowshares. Chris, would you unmute yourself? I see that Aniko has posted a link to your book. Would you just unmute yourself for a minute if you can hear me, and just tell us the name of your book and give us just a brief overview of it? You've gotten some incredible reviews. You've had some fantastic events on YouTube, and you have another one coming at Politics and Prose in DC, which we can watch. Tell us about
a headset
on it.
I have a headset on.
I can hear you.
Chris, we can hear you. You need to speak, and I prompted you to start your video.
The dissenters and deserters and objectors to America's wars.
And when is your event at Politics and Prose?
It just happened. It's on YouTube now. You can find it.
Oh, great. You've gotten some amazing reviews, and it's such a great topic. Congratulations. And
the struggle against nuclear weapons is so interlaced with it. I mean, Bayard Rustin, who was one of the founders of SANE, which became Peace Action, who maybe people know because he was giant to the civil rights movement, but he was very hugely anti-nuclear, and since the end of his life, really working on that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions or comments? Well, actually, I have one more question for Susie. So we have a new president, thank God. Are you hopeful? I mean, what's your read on Biden, himself and the people he's surrounded himself with, including a hunter girl. Are you hopeful that he's going to be amenable to improving U.S. policies and moving things in the direction that, you know, that we're all hoping for, that you're working for? And thanks. And Chris says, I see that Chris has put her website there too. So take a look in the chat, because her book is terrific.
Yeah, so I'm hopeful. I don't expect quick change. I do expect, excuse me, I do expect some reduction of idiotic policies that Trump had put in, because he really did like put forward some stupid things. A whole new class of nuclear weapons he wanted to build. He said, we're gonna have the biggest of them all. Sorry, I can't do an impression. That's not my that's not my gig. But he was really having this gigantic, you know, kind of pissing contest, if you will, around like hypersonic missiles and all these things. And I think that when you look at who Biden is appointing, it's people who believe that multilateral arms control matters. Number one, like international community matters. That's a big change right there. And who believe that it is possible to make change. It's possible to bring the numbers down safely and securely. And it is possible. So we're not going to have another Obama in Prague moment where I see the end of the, you know, I believe there's a path to the end of nuclear weapons. But we are going to see some sane policies coming through. We're going to see people pull back from the brink of nuclear war, which honestly, we've been kind of teetering. There's been threats of use of nuclear weapons like we haven't seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And there's a little bit of hope. And it's not going to change overnight, but nothing good changes overnight. Real change, good change takes time.
Right. Right. And sometimes when you change things too fast, it's easily undone by the next backlash that comes along. So incremental change, it can be, you know, sometimes it's more powerful because it's longer lasting, and it gets people, you know, into the moment and you know, creates the understanding and the support that's needed over generations and over time. Let's see, I see Pat has asked a question. Do you think Iran is working to develop nuclear weapons? I mean, that's a big question. And that's, you know, that's been a question that has resulted in untold damage in the Middle East and elsewhere for the past 20 years.
Yeah. And see, here's the thing. For the most part, like, countries that have good human rights policies are not countries that have strong nuclear weapons programs, right? Like, countries make a decision. And at one point, there are about 40 countries who were on the path to developing nuclear weapons. And most of them chose not to. So if your house is in order at home, the likelihood is that you're not going to build nuclear weapons. Iran is re-energizing its nuclear weapon capability. It doesn't have a nuclear bomb. It doesn't have a working missile. It doesn't have the technology yet. But the policies of the last several years, the withdrawal from the deal that Trump did, when he pulled out of that deal with Iran, he trashed it. He trashed a decade of hard work. But that's what the guy did. The guy was a bull in a china shop. And it's going to take a while to get there, to rebuild. The trust, I mean, Iran is not feeling like they can trust the US to re-enter negotiations, even with a new president. They're saying, hey, we're happy to talk, but let's see you do something. You also have obligations. Let's see you meet some of your obligations, then we'll talk. Now, there's a lot of issues with Iran in the region, with their human rights record. There's a lot of problems. When it comes to this tiny thing, we had a solution. But didn't take care of everything. No one thing ever takes care of everything, right? There's no magical pill that's like, oh yes, everything in the world is awesome. or maybe there is and nobody gave me one. But you know, we'll get there. And with dedicated diplomacy, which at least the Biden administration is willing to engage with, we can get there again. And in the meantime, I think there are cool heads. It's not going to get too hot.
That's good. Another reason to feel joy as things change and to feel a little bit hopeful, you know, for the future. All right, I think we're almost out of time, and I pride myself on being, you know, within the strictures of our allotted hour. I know everybody's busy. Everything just seems to take so long with the shutdown and the new concerns about the new variant of the virus. So I think I'm going to start to wind things up here. Oh, I see one last question. Let's squeeze that in while we can from my dear friend Leslie Hunter Gadsden, my co-classmate from class of '77. In addition to Iran and Korea, which countries are closer to developing nuclear power yet open to discussions against them? Let's squeeze that one in, and then we'll say our goodbyes.
Okay, so when it comes to the energy thing, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are both embarking on new nuclear power station processes, and it's a way to hedge. If you have that capability and that technology at home, you can make nuclear weapons. But for the most part, everyone who has that technology said no, we're not going to do it. They allow inspections regularly. South Africa is a great example of a country that had nuclear weapons and completely got rid of them and now champions for others to do the same.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, South Africa is quite awesome. And they're on this issue, they're phenomenal and real leaders. And they push others within the BRICS movement to do so as well, like using economic cooperation. Hey, let's focus on what's good for society, not something that can destroy society. And so I'm a big fan of South Africa for that. So like, I don't worry about new countries showing up with nuclear weapons. I worry most about the countries that have them, either losing control, losing the weapons, having accidents with them, or having near misses, having a communications error that shows there are incoming missiles, when in fact it's like a Norwegian weather balloon, and this has happened. And firing missiles in return. So that's what worries me more than anything. But we can get there, and we can take small steps to get there. We can take big steps to get there. Depends on where you are and what you want to do. I'd like to end with just a note that this is an issue. It feels very far away, but it is something that impacts all of us. Like, if these bombs get used, there's nothing we can do to clean up. So no, we can, but it takes a long time. So if you have a minute to tell somebody about this, if you want to share the live stream that you saw today, please do. If you want to get in touch with me, if you have more questions or you just want to reach out, I'm really happy to hear from folks on this issue. I'm on all the social media because, you know, I'm not a millennial, but I pretend to be, so I can feel like a cool kid. And I'm really happy that everybody here came to join this talk today, and grateful for your energy to the issue, and you know, for just thinking about it as a first step to doing something. So
yeah, I think we all learned so much today from you, Susie. Like you say, it's an issue that feels far away, but it is important, you know, in this existential way, because if there's one mistake, that's it. We can't fix it. It's just, we've learned so much from you. Thank you so much. And I thank everybody for coming. Like I said, you know, it's a dark January day and we all have 10 million things to do and everything is so complicated in pandemic times. I'm just so grateful for everyone's attention and the great comments and questions. Let's follow Susie on Twitter. And Susie, if, you know, in post-pandemic times, if you're in New York and you need folks to come out, you know, to an event or a rally or a talk or something, please definitely reach out. Your Hunter sisters and brothers will be there for you. This has just been so fantastic. And Pat Lamanna, thank you again for starting us off with music. And I hope someday to play and sing with you in person. This has just been wonderful. Thanks everybody. And, you know, I'll see you on the internet.
And thank you so much for Beth for the wonderful questions and leading the discussion as well.
And Aniko, thank you for organizing it. It takes a tremendous amount of coordination to do something like this. We're in, 3 different locations and internationally, and
You ladies make it easy. And thank you for Pat for actually, thanks to her Hiroshima concert, we connected with Susi, and that's how it all happened. So it's all a group effort. So thank you so much for coming out, and thank you so much for the great event. See you soon.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.